Hello friends, so today's video is going to be a list of emotional books. All of these books are going to be fantasy with the exception of one, and that would be a contemporary story. I'm actually going to start with that one, and it would be Maame. This is what I would consider to be autofiction, which if you've never heard that term, it's when a book is fictional, but it is also very much rooted in the author's real life and their experiences, so it's almost autobiographical at the same time. And I could tell that that was likely the case with this one, as so much of what occurs in this was very realistic and very relatable to a experience that I had in my life, and something I think a lot of other people who have experienced something similar, you're probably going to feel the same way of, I've never felt so seen before. I've never met somebody who's gone through this because it's such a specific kind of thing and it's so difficult. And that would be when a loved one is ill, terminally ill or dying, or they have something that requires them to have a lot of assistance and help. And in this particular book, the main character's father has Parkinson's, and she is the one that is primarily taking care of him. She also is very young, and she's trying to figure out how to navigate her own life, what she wants out of life. She doesn't really know all that much about herself, and even a lot of the basic things that a lot of people her age have already kind of figured out because she has spent so much time taking care of her father. She has other family members, but they are not necessarily able to help as much, or maybe they are able to help, but they just don't because they constantly tell her, well, you're just better at this kind of thing. And there's so much to this book that not only does it have a lot about grief, a lot about identity, a lot about being a caretaker. There's just so much to it that even if you haven't experienced those things yourself, I think it can be very eye-opening, and it can create so much empathy, and it can also just open your eyes to the fact that some of the people in your everyday life might be experiencing these very things, or people that you know are experiencing these things. You might not really quite know what those things are like and how it affects a person. So you might have the surface level understanding, but then this kind of book it uncovers and it helps you see the full picture, or at least some of the picture that you wouldn't have gotten otherwise. I thought it was fantastically done. It was so emotional. There was one part in particular where I was, I don't cry when I read books, but I feel like this one, if I hadn't soldiered on and powered through, I definitely would have started crying. So many times in this, and there were so many things that made me angry, and there were so many things that just were almost gasp worthy of like, no, and just really heartbreaking. But it is a fantastic book, and it is so accurate to these types of experiences. So if you want to know more about what it's like to have this sort of a situation, while not exactly the same to mine, I do think that what I've experienced that is similar, I can say that I've never read anything that depicts it quite the way that Maame did. Next up is a book that I know for a lot of you that are parents, you definitely sobbed your eyes out when you read this, and that would be Sword of Keigen. There is an interesting layout, I'll say, to the story, and at the beginning, it's very on the nose in its world building. It's like, can you tell that there's propaganda? Well, there is, and it's really obvious. We're following this society that has always been taught and told that their specific area is responsible for protecting the rest of the country in the event that somebody attacks them. So it's very much a warrior-centered culture, and it's interesting because that might make you think, as with the cover, that this is going to be an older setting or inspired by an older setting for this fantasy world. But it's actually more modern day, but they're almost kind of kept in a different time in how their society is structured. But regardless, they are told that they are the ones that have honor and that they will be powerful and protect. And so they live by a certain code and a certain set of things that their government has told them. And our young main character is starting to question those things, and his mother is conflicted because on one hand, she's proud of her son for thinking for himself, for challenging what they have been taught, but at the same time, she's a mother and she wants her son to be safe, and she does not want him to be put in harm's way if he questions too much. And she also is somebody who is dealing with a lot of feeling isolated and feeling so alone, despite the fact that she's married, that she has children, that she has friends. But that sense of isolation and solitude is reflected on so well in the story. The familial drama, I guess you could call it, within the book is handled basically better than in any other thing I've ever read. And then the relationship between her and her son and the way that all of that unfolds is masterful. That said, the beginning is weird. There's some almost CW-like action superhero type stuff mixed in, and then the ending is a little odd. But despite all of that, you will pretty much have anybody who agrees with those statements tell you it doesn't matter because the middle chunk is so well done and it's so good and so unlike anything you've probably read that it really doesn't matter. I'm basically saying it doesn't matter. Those other things are a little funny and that there's maybe some clunkiness to the pacing and the development, but it doesn't matter because that middle chunk is so good and so emotional. Next up, I'm like getting choked up just thinking about the quote that I know is the quote for a lot of people, although this book and this series is very quotable overall anyway, but the Stormlight Archive. And specifically for today, I'm going to be talking about Rhythm of War, and the quote that I get so emotional over, I'm trying to, keep it together. The one about "you will be warm again." Oh my gosh, I can't even think about it. As you can probably tell, I can't even think about that quote without getting emotional. This is the level of crying that I do when I'm reading, where I'm just like, deep breaths, look at the ceiling if you have to look up there, but just keep it together and keep going. And I just really push through, super healthy. But anyway, it's not just that quote, of course. It's so many other things about this series. There's so many emotional moments when it comes to the character development as individual characters, the relationship building between characters, the sense of brotherhood, the sense of friendship, the almost mentor-mentee type of relationship, the defying expectations of proving people wrong. There's just so many things about this that are so emotional. And the Sanderlanches, of course. Those enormous, big, huge moments in the story where everything just comes together and you're on the edge of your seat, but you're also afraid, but you're also really emotionally invested, and there's just so much. It's just tugging at you left and right, and it's so good. It's so good. But to zero in, the mental health representation in this series, and specifically depression, the way it is depicted. I talked about with Maame that there are aspects of that for my own experiences with those types of situations, or that type of situation, I felt so seen, and it felt so realistic to what that is like. I can say the same thing about the way that depression is depicted in the story. I've never read anything that describes gosh darn it, I can't even talk about it. It is why I don't care if other people say, I'm tired of reading about the mopiness and about Kaladin, he's sad again, because I'm just like, I don't care if you think that, okay? Because it's perfect, and Kaladin is perfect, and it's just, there's nothing else that even comes close to capturing that feeling. So anyway, I'm being silly and goofy because I will start crying if I am more serious. Rhythm of War, but also Stormlight Archive in general. Next up, we have The Kingdom of Back. This is a book that I wasn't even sure I wanted to pick up. I wasn't sure I was going to like it. If you don't know, I majored in music, specifically in strings pedagogy, which is just a fancy way of saying becoming a music teacher who knows a lot about stringed instruments. But regardless, this follows Nenuro Mozart, who is Mozart Amadeus's sister. And I'm sure most of you have heard the name Mozart. I'm sure a lot of people didn't even know that he had a sister who was just as talented, if not more talented, than he was. However, because of the restrictions placed on women at that time, that is the reason that she was not allowed to really reach her fullest potential, you could say. And Marie Lu, I was unsure because I was like, this is so outside what she typically writes. Because I majored in music, I'm afraid that I'm going to end up being kind of annoyed by some of the aspects of this book in case they're not accurate. Not that I want to be that snobby person, but it's just kind of hard to remove yourself from this is just trying to capture a feeling, and it's okay if it's not perfectly accurate. But there wasn't really anything in it that irked me as somebody who majored in music, so that was good. But beyond that, it was phenomenal. It's also kind of magical realism. I don't really like magical realism typically. And the idea is that she, in her mind, has this almost Narnia-esque place that she travels to. And there really was a story that the Mozart siblings would have this fantastical land that they were the king and queen of. It was this little story that they would tell each other and that they would have just a child's imagination to occupy themselves when they were traveling from place to place for performances. And so Marie Lu took that concept and she created this magical realism type of setting for these children to go to. And that setting and what Nannerl Mozart is experiencing in that place is so much a reflection of her going from being a child who has this passion and this love for music to becoming an adult and realizing the closer and closer she gets to adulthood, the more her relationship with her family members is changing, the more she's starting to have that childlike wonder stripped away and darkened by the way that society has not progressed to a point that it should. And what's sad is that that concept of wanting this legacy through your music and through your art, to want to be remembered and to know that she's not really remembered. It's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking. And there's just so many quotes that make me so emotional. Last for today, we have Fury Song by Rosario Munda. This is the third and final book in the Aurelian Cycle. And there's a lot of emotional moments throughout this trilogy. I think that the way the author handles trauma, triumph, hardship, the way she does it all is so amazing. The reason I'm highlighting this third book specifically is because there's a number of parts where I was like, oh my gosh. There's one part in particular that is one of the individual most tragic scenes in anything. I read it and I was like, what are you doing? No, I was so upset. And once again, what I was talking about earlier of just look at the ceiling and then keep reading and keep going, otherwise you're gonna be a wreck. That was the kind of feeling that I had in that scene. And if you've read it, you already know. You're probably not like, which one? You know. It is so sad. It is so sad. But the way to, it's not just what's happening in that moment. It's also the almost shift in perspective that you get. I can't handle it. It's emotional. That's it. That's all there is to say. It's emotional, and I love this trilogy. Over on my side channel, I will be doing the same style of video for things that are not necessarily books, but are also stories I know a lot of you are really into and really like as well. So I will have that channel linked in the description bar, and then I'm not sure which video will go up first, this one or the one on that channel, but if it's up by the time this goes up, I'll have that specific video linked. But regardless, I would love to know what books are extremely emotional for you. Were there any books that I mentioned that are on your list? But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.